Welcome to another episode of Builders, Budgets, and Beers. For episode 7, we have our guest, Bryan Uhler, president, owner of Pioneer Builders. And if you're a listener that is curious as to what the most successful speculative builders are doing in today's market, this is an episode for you. We talked to a lot of builders, a lot of speculative builders, a lot of custom home builders, and Bryan has seemingly cracked the code to manage his cash, build the way that he wants to, and make rational decisions as a builder. So if this is you wanting to learn more about how to run a healthier speculative building business, buckle up. This is the episode for you.
All right, Bryan, good to see you again. Last time I saw you, I
Good
think I
to
was
be
doing a
here.
little IBS video with you. You were praising Adaptive over there. I like that. Thank you.
Yeah, I
remember
was
that?
there with Reisinger. You guys were in that technology zone, I think. That was pretty exciting stuff.
Yeah. Good to have you on. Reece, what did we get for the beer of the week here?
No beer, which is not uncommon, or I guess crazy for the Seattle-based builder. We went with a nice, robust coffee that actually Bryan ended up exactly sending me a bag of right there. It's the whiskey barrel aged. It's Knob Creek, right?
Knob Creek bourbon, so it's not beer, but maybe something a little stronger.
That's right. And I did. I made a nice little pour over here. I'm sipping on it. I'm actually sipping on it from my mug from Mercury Mosaics, which hosted Mark D. Williams' Curious Builder podcast roundtable. They gave it to all of us. So I'm just like all buildered out over here. I've got my swag from these subs. I've got coffee from these builders. That's a good coffee.
Yeah.
You have
And that's
yours?
what I've got. I've got just a little blue and yellow. I'm pretty sure it's Starbucks. It's pretty, it's got a lot of odor. I don't know how you can smell it over there. It's too hot for me to start. I always do a French press. So my wife helped me on it, and
I do pour
I've
overs.
been waiting a long time for this moment.
I've
Yeah.
had the whiskey barrel aged coffee beans, and you're right. When you open the bag, it smells like whiskey.
Yes. Yeah, I got it over in the Seattle. They've got kind of a special roastery, kind of a high-end store. So they have specialty coffees and things. It was pretty cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Well, usually Reece is drinking a beer, but I guess he'll be, super dialed
I'm
in.
just going to start
on this
shaking
podcast.
from all the
He'll be-
caffeine in this coffee.
He'll be very serious on this podcast. Really, better be ready for the tough questions. Nothing.
That's
casual
right.
here.
That's right. We're just going to grill you over here.
Okay, Bryan. So we want to talk today. You've talked about yourself being kind of like an accountant builder, right? You've described yourself as that in the past. So you have a background in accounting, right? Before you got into building, which is pretty rare, right? Construction has a lot of financial complexity, but usually the people starting these businesses don't have a background in finance or accounting, which leads to problems. You come from an accountant background, so we want to hear about that today. So yeah, how'd you get your start in building after getting going with accounting? It seemed like an undergrad.
Yeah, we have to go back in time to my dad back in North Dakota. He was the second of 8 kids as a farmer, and he was the first of the kids to go to college. So he received no direction or anything as far as that was concerned. He just went, and they had the track that you can take, and he just happened to pick finance and accounting for a major, and he minored in political science, which is just hilarious. So if you're watching Jeopardy and they're like, "What is the term of a senator?" He'll come up with it. It's pretty crazy.
Wow.
So yeah, that's where it started.
That's actually a pretty good background to get into building for competitive advantage. You know how to do all the books, and then you can lobby the local politicians to get your zoning changed, get your permits approved. You got the double whammy there.
Or at least win Jeopardy. I mean, you could also
that's
go that route.
Yeah.
Which is equally as beneficial.
That was early 70s, late 60s actually, and that was about the time of the Vietnam War. So he decided to enlist, and he got into the real estate corps. So he was back in Saigon and Vietnam actually managing leases that the US Army took out while he was there. So he was a finance guy. And then when he came back, by that point, my mom and her family had moved out to where I live in Washington, and there were no jobs at the bank where my grandpa worked. So one of the gentlemen was like, well, I think there's a general contractor who's looking for an accountant. So Dad got a job over there, and he was a comptroller, and that's where he started. That's where he learned cost accounting. He was always a frugal person by nature. Just of all the kids, he was the one who saved. Um, and then eventually, he actually learned superintending, actually building and construction. Was getting frustrated because of how much capital investment, aka buying heavy equipment, was going on because one of the guys liked heavy equipment and he could just see it was a mess. And so the lady who taught him cost accounting said, well, Tim, you can either quit or you can stop complaining. Dad tells the story a little differently, but bottom line, he left on good terms, which was nice. And in the late 70s is when he went out on his own and started building.
And started building. And is that the same company today? Is that Pioneer, or did you?
It is.
Okay, cool. Okay.
Yeah, started it in 77. I was born in 80. I'm the third of us kids. So Dad had, when he started, he had 6 specs, 2 kids, and it's just crazy that they gave him that kind of money, but they trusted him, and he's a hard worker. So what he did on the numbers side, of course, he worked at night, doing the numbers. He was bags on, but he would work with people who knew more the craft of building. And has always been humble, kind of did what he was told. Then he did the numbers at night. And then eventually, my brother joined the business. My sister actually used to work for the firm. And then now I've taken over.
Okay, cool. Okay. Tell us a little bit about Pioneer. How many projects you doing? What types of projects you doing?
So it's been, it's been a roller coaster. I think one summer Dad might have sold 25 houses. Right now, I don't even know if we'll close on one house this year. So it's very much changed throughout the years. With interest rates doing what they have done, we just can't sell our houses currently. We shifted over to being exclusively spec about 6-7 years ago.
Okay.
So we were able to sell them no problem. In the past, we've done a lot of customs and pre-sales. So what we end up doing if we can't sell them is we end up renting them. And then eventually the values come back and then we sell them. Otherwise, if we're chasing the bottom, we lose all of our margins and any capital appreciation that we could get.
Okay. So all specs. What types of houses are these? High end, or what are you going after? What type of market?
It's funny. They're very holistically designed and executed. So they're not like 25,000 square foot ultra luxury. I would say they vary from upper 2000s to 4,000 square feet, somewhere in that world. Okay. But I would like to think that they're very intelligently designed as far as from civil engineering all the way through to finishes, that everything, it's kind of like the human body. Everything works together. Nothing is independent. And so that's my approach to design and construction, is nothing is isolated in a silo.
Okay. Cool. So all these are single family?
They're all single family. Yep. Right now we are taking on a custom. The reason we do specs, number one, because we can. Number two, the amount of extra management it takes for a custom is astronomically more than I could just go in. My brother and I can look at something and say, hey, I think we should open up this wall. We look at the plans and there's our change order. Don't have to ask anybody anything. So it's nice. But when nothing's selling, it's like, okay, so nobody's buying Boeing 787s. Well, we're just going to keep building them until we go bankrupt. It's like, no, I guess we're doing 737s, or whatever the case.
Yeah. I think this could be an interesting topic to go deep on for the audience, because we haven't had anybody, I think, on that does exclusively specs, and certainly no one that's done specs from the 70s and is still in business, because it's high risk. So we'd love to hear more about this, kind of how you manage the risk, the market ebbs and flows. And then I would love to hear more about your strategy of kind of how you transition them to rentals and how that works out for you, because I think that would be interesting. for the audience?
So it's very interesting because most people tend to go from the custom world into the spec world, but Dad started Spec. And it's kind of like, quite frankly, he didn't know any better. It's like having kids. You're not doing a cost benefit analysis of is this a good financial investment? You're like, I don't know what I'm doing. I guess we're having a kid. And in hindsight, hopefully I did a good job. So Dad, he worked for a company that did specs. So for him, it wasn't weird. And I talked to him recently about how Charlie got into that. And I think it was Charlie's uncle. So more than likely, this goes back 75, 80 years. I mean, who knows where it actually started, the origin story of Wolverine. I mean, Pioneer Builders. So one of the biggest keys is Dad took a wage while he was building Spec. So he was able to still make ends meet, put food on the table, and take care of their finances. And then you have that baked in. Then anything that you make above and beyond that is golden. But even if you don't make any money, you've still survived and you've lived a decent life. The other thing is he does not live high on the hog, and I would like to think that I'm kind of the same mentality. You know, the pants that I'm wearing right now are probably 15 years old. I don't know how old they are, but and I'm okay with that. Not that I won't spend the money on a good cup of coffee or, that kind of thing. I think you have to enjoy life, but it is that mentality of, do I need to do this? And one of the biggest mistakes people in the spec world make is maybe they look at everybody on Instagram and what they're doing. And they think, oh, I've got to build with all of this building science stuff. And it's like, no, you don't. Like, if you use this particular house wrap, your house is going to perform just fine. You may have to do some other things, but don't get wrapped up into this is how Bryan builds, so I'm going to do the same thing. Can't do it. You have to be very rational about the decisions you make.
Yeah. Okay. Go ahead, Reece.
You made a comment earlier, Bryan, about your dad surrounding himself with people that were more craftsmen, right? He came from the business side, surrounding himself with the craftsmen. So obviously he knew the number side, and that's the path that you're going down in terms of spec builders kind of getting over the top with what are they going to put into the house and how are they going to spec it out. And they're not really writing the numbers on it, which I think would be an interesting avenue to take for the listener is what does your dashboard look like so that you can manage that build from a financial standpoint and make those decisions comfortably?
Yeah, I'll use an illustration that is not very bean counter-ish, but it'll illustrate the point. I know that if I go to Subway and get a 6-inch veggie, or I go to McDonald's and get a triple cheeseburger, one of them is going to have more calories. I don't even need to look at a menu. I just know that. So there's certain decisions that you can just make right off the bat and go, nope, we're not doing X, Y, or Z. On the other hand, my uncle was doing the STP, the Seattle to Portland bike ride years ago.
Okay.
And he was just dragging. He was just dying. He ran into McDonald's, got himself whatever he got himself, and he felt like $1 million and finished the race. So you kind of have to know when's the time to have the triple cheeseburger and when's the time to have the 6-inch sub, because there will be some things with a bigger bang for its buck that will lead to a sale.
Sure. Well, is this all gut? Is this all just experience, or are you using data? Are you using spreadsheets? Are you using, what are you doing? Yeah.
Yeah. So that's a big question. I'll give you one example for a structural fix that we're doing right now. Okay. For whatever reason, we don't have any bottle jack hydraulic jacks anymore.
I saw this post, I think I saw this post.
Yeah, so I called the rental place, and they're $9 a day. We would need 2 of them, but I would have to drive down there. And while I don't get an hourly wage, I could estimate something. Right. Lowe's had them for $35 a piece, so you can do some back of the napkin math at 9.2% interest. We have a Lowe's for Pros card that took some getting, but we've got it. That's 5% off. We get a 2% early pay discount. So just call it a wash with your sales tax. And then you go, now we'll have it forever, unless the guys who are there right now break the bottle jacks. So there are times where I take the time to do the cost benefit analysis, but I can't just look at the dollars and cents. And if cash flow was an issue, I could look at that too and go, nope, it's not the time to invest. We are only going to look at how many dollars and cents leaves the company and ignore the intangibles.
Yeah.
So I think that is a much more early decision that a company would have to make, being that micro. But if you're that micro up front, and what we've done as a company is basically reinvested a lot of the earnings. So we've got pretty healthy retained earnings. So when we have a structural issue like we have now that we are not on the hook for, but we're
Yeah.
fixing it anyway, we have the capital to do it and move on with our life instead of getting bogged down.
Yeah.
But if you are draining the company, you will have no reserves. And when these things come up, in my opinion, you end up in lawsuits because you're like, I can't afford to do X, Y, or Z, or you go bankrupt.
Yeah.
And we've made it
Yeah.
this far.
Yeah, that's that. When you said earlier, some builders are looking at Instagram thinking maybe I need to buy that or do it that way. I think that this is what I was asking of how did you manage the risk over all these years being a spec builder? It obviously with specs, you're going to have some boom years, right? The market explodes and some down years where you can't sell a house. So you need to smooth that out by what you called retained earnings. For the audience, what that simply means is saving some of the cash that you make from these houses, not reinvesting it right away, right? So having a stockpile of cash that you can draw upon when times are tough. That's what it sounds like, right?
Close. We do have healthy liquid assets, meaning cash or treasuries. Like right now, you can actually get 5.4%. I don't know what it is, but you can actually get a return. We've also done a lot of land purchasing. So we can typically make money on the land side and we can make money on the house side.
Okay.
So if you're a custom home builder, especially these guys that are cost plus, you are limiting your availability to make money doing it that way. But if you're investing it in land or real estate or things like that, and I'm not saying everybody should, we just happen to be able to. And if you develop it, like right now, we're developing a 7-acre parcel. Technically, we're building on it. We're putting money into it. We just, anyway, long story. We could be here. I could tell you story after story after story. When you develop it, you can also make the profit off of the work you do to develop.
Yep.
So there's another profit place there. What I would suggest as far as risk and reward, my econ teacher, Mr. Wilkin, would just laugh because my dad cannot handle the stock market. Like, he should not own stocks because he can't handle it. Meanwhile, every builder or developer goes bankrupt at some point or multiple times.
Yeah.
And dad's cool with it. And so you think to yourself, okay, can we control what Elon Musk decides to tweet out this morning and how that's going to affect the stock price, or X, I guess, is what I'm supposed to call it? But we can directly impact the decisions made with construction. So there is a market impact to what the Fed decides to do, or if there's these crazy shocks that happens, that affects everybody. So we're all kind of like in a risky environment, period.
Yep.
But we're able to control our risk a little bit more by virtue of controlling the process.
And then, so you're saying you have a good cash stockpile, but you're also buying land. Is what you're saying? You have like a bank of land assets. What is the rough
Exactly.
mix between those two? Like, is it 2/3 land, 1/3 cash, half? What is it?
It's impossible to tell because we've owned some of the land for so long.
Yeah.
Who knows what it's worth? It's kind of like, hey, how much is my land worth? What can somebody buy it for? Right?
Yep.
You don't
Yep.
know. So having said that, I'm going to say 65, 70% of value is in land, and then the rest is in liquid assets.
Okay. And then land itself is kind of volatile though, no, right? So like this year, it sounds like it's hard to sell houses or close on houses, wouldn't it be also hard to sell the land, or no? Tell us about that. I think the audience is really interested.
Yeah. Here's the deal. They're not making any more of it. That's the expression when it comes to land. So over time, it is going to have value. I was dealing with a guy, we were really close to selling a lot to him, and it fell apart because he wasn't willing to spend enough for what we were willing to sell it for. So if we needed the capital, we could. If we were having a hard time, because it is a little bit more of a frozen asset, you just can lower the price until you have to sell. But if you've made the decisions for almost 50 years now, whatever it is, we're not in a situation where we have to panic.
Yeah. And then, so tell us a little bit then about this year, right? It's kind of an interesting time for you. It sounds like you're saying you haven't closed on a bunch of houses, but you're pursuing this rental strategy. When you pursue the rental strategy, one of the challenges I'd imagine is you have some sort of construction loan in place, so you need to I would imagine, take that out and place it with a new loan, or are you not using debt when you build these spec homes?
You could imagine that, but then that would just be using your imagination.
Okay.
No, so you have to think about that. What are your carrying costs? If you don't have any because you've got good retained earnings, then you're kind of in a good situation.
Okay. Got it.
So
That's the big
the decisions that you would make in the 80s might not be the decisions you'd make in 2024.
Okay.
But how it benefits us, we built the house. So full circle to the beginning of the conversation. It is holistically built houses. It's not going out and trying to buy a $95,000 house and then all you're doing is fixing it up. These are top of the line houses that do not have problems. And if they do, we've got a whole slew of subcontractors that we can enlist. We can fix things. We go through the houses every couple of months and inspect them, check the filters. We get depreciation expense. We get monthly income. Right now, we've sold a house on contract, so we're kind of pushing out when we're going to get paid. So there's just a lot of flexibility with all of those things. Then when we sell the house, instead of at ordinary income for taxation purposes, it's long-term capital gains tax. So you save money on the taxes side as well.
Because you've been holding the land for a long time.
The land, I don't believe, slides into the depreciation part. I guess I'm kind of answering a different question. You depreciate the house, the construction and improvements. The land is separate. So you can depreciate the house. Then when you sell the house later, you recapture the depreciation and you pay capital gains tax on the gain on sale of asset, if I'm using the right language.
Yeah. Okay. So you do not use debt in your business. Is that what you were saying?
We don't.
You don't use.
If you consider credit cards to get mileage and then pay them off every month, debt, but I don't really consider that debt.
Okay. So this is in many ways, I would imagine, somewhat of the reason for your long-term stability and success in the business, right? You're not really exposed to market fluctuations as much because you don't have a bank to pay interest expense to.
But we absolutely have throughout the years. We've just gotten to this point. And so those are the decisions. If you've got lending and all of a sudden you've drawn down your entire thing and the market falls out, I'm telling you, anybody who's successful will tell you they experienced luck, or they experienced, what would you say, circumstances beyond their control. You do the best you can, but sometimes the cards that are dealt just don't go your way. So it's years ago, Dad was at this roundtable conference thing, and very self-important people, and supposed to go around and say, well, what made you successful? And Dad stands up and he says, more guts than brains. And you could invest in Japan in 1940, and then all of a sudden 1941 hits. Like,
right.
Terrible example, but you get the point of what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, I imagine a lot of builders, I'm sure they're listening or out there just generally have heard of your business, right? You have a pretty big profile online and you're doing a lot of specs. If they're interested in getting into specs, obviously you need money to get into specs. And it's hard to have enough cash, pure cash equity to just buy a house. So what would be the advice you'd give builders when thinking about getting into the spec business around
Be
how
a
much of a
nice
loan you should
person.
take out? Be a nice person. Okay, that's good.
Yeah.
More
Yeah, I took,
guts than
I
brains,
can't
being
remember
nice.
what the class was. No, in all seriousness, it wasn't banking 101. I can't remember. But there was a number of different C's, if I remember right, that they would look at. Capital, whatever. One of them was like character. If you're a man or a woman of integrity and you can look at somebody in the eye and you're being dead honest with them and you're kind of a likable person, you can work with people who have money. That could be a bank. It could be somebody else who's a little bit older. So honestly, I would say work on your character. I know that's not the typical answer, but try to be an authentic person of integrity. If I was to do it and dad hadn't set up the company, and actually I did start a company back in the early 2000s. Another long story. I would suggest honestly little fixer uppers, like buy something, work on it yourself, get your sweat equity, live in it for 2 years. I think it's every 5 years that you can sell your house, and just
I think it's
start
two.
getting. Say that again.
I'm pretty sure it's 2. You have to have that homeowner's occupancy.
Yeah.
Pretty sure in order to do that, it's a 2-year. I think it could be very high state, but
I think it's live in there 2 years, no more often than 2 times in 5 years. So, do the math on
yeah.
how often you would stay there. You live in your house, you don't go wild and crazy with it. You're going to start building up your skills, maybe some subcontractors, things like that, and just start networking and seeing what you can do. And opportunities can come along. I was just at the office today. I don't go there that often, and there was a call from a guy from a local real estate company, 2 point something acres. It's zoned like medium residential. It's in Port Orchard here. 12 to 18 units is what it could take. Now, we're not going to take it. I'll tell you that right now. But when you're in the game for a while, you start networking and people know that you're around, and then things start happening. So
Yeah,
start
totally.
somewhere.
Yeah.
Well, and that goes into the C's. I've heard those two before. I can't remember them, but how important? So the character is an important piece, but how important is it when you are wanting to like use bank financing or you are going to talk to a bank to have really solid, clean financials? Like, would you say that that's one of the bigger differentiating points, or maybe is that a part of building the character of saying, here's the financials on my project. This is what I think I can do the job for, and having everything buttoned up for the bank?
I have no idea. I'm not going to make up an answer just because
You're not working with banks.
the situation is completely and utterly changed. What I might say is, and this kind of goes toward what you guys are trying to accomplish as a firm, have your books tight. Like if a banker looks at my books right now, everything is to the penny. And they're a pretty doggone complicated set of books. So learn the finances. There's a million electricians, plumbers, HVAC guys. But to be a builder who knows exactly what your books look like, and there's not just like some box of receipts that have never been, oh, and then I'm going to give my box of receipts to the bookkeeper, and maybe I'm going to, no. If you act unprofessional, you will not succeed. But anyway, sorry, I got a little passionate there.
No, but I think that's good. And like we candidly don't like to do a lot of like endorsing of adaptive on here. But I think from a speculative world, even in these conversations that we have on a daily basis and some of the more roundtables that I've been a part of, this is a big conversation, right? You can have the character, you can have the best intentions, but if you're not tracking the financials and the costs and the accounting on your business, and you try to go toe to toe in these conversations, you can get laughed out the door and labeled pretty quickly if, to your point, you're not professional and buttoned up on this.
And every aspect of life, in my opinion, if you're going to be an elite athlete, there comes a point where you take it to the next level. If you're going to be these guys who are in their 50s and 60s at like 12% body fat and look amazing. There's a reason for it. They are counting the numbers from their tempos for weights, for their macros, and all this kind of stuff. If you want to be elite, you have to be elite. You can't just pretend.
Yeah. Well, I mean, could you demystify it for us a little bit? So you have tight books. Obviously, it's complicated, but I think Reece was mentioning this earlier. What, as the business owner, you're just trying to get a sense of how your portfolio of houses is performing, how the construction's progressing from a financial perspective. What is your dashboard look like? What are the 3 reports you want to see, right? At a high level. Really, what are you looking at in your business on a regular
I
basis?
have a calendar event reminder every month, and I don't do it every month, but I'm also doing my own bookkeeping and payroll and everything. But balance sheet, it doesn't fluctuate too terribly much for me. I reconcile my work in process just to make sure that that's tight. But profit and loss I actually just did it today or yesterday. Like, not because I was having this conversation. It was just like, hey, let's see where we're at. We're positive on the year. Normally, we're way more positive on the year, but we're positive. So I'm going to take that as a win. But a part of it is because we've got the cash and we're not earning 0.2% at the bank anymore.
Yep.
So I've got a Vanguard account. I also reconcile the bank like every day. It's not obsessive. It's just part of the habit. And it's interesting. You can see when companies cash their checks quickly, which ones don't. So there is like a little bit of, you can strategize a little bit on where things are at, which is interesting. But the money market fund at Vanguard is earning 5.15. I'm making that up, but it's right around there.
Mm-hmm.
And if you get treasuries short term, it's basically as good as cash, and it's a higher rate of return. So I have like a methodology for investing that, and then keeping truly liquid assets available for paying subcontractors and things like that. However, what I am doing right now is building relatively slowly.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm stretching out the capital, as weird as it sounds, hoping for like a recession or something like that to give the Fed justification to lower rates. Because if mortgage rates drop, we're back in business.
100%.
Yeah. So you have the balance sheet, you have the P&L, you're catching up on your WIP. What about at a project level? Are you looking at some sort of regular report on a project level, individual projects?
Yes and no. So I've got, let's just say 75 to 100 cost classifications for each home. I break out, for example, floor covering has a materials master item, and then hardwood materials, carpet materials, tile materials as sub items. And then subcontractors would be a different one. And so that's just an example all the way down the line. When I use QuickBooks, it automatically populates with the previous payments that I've made or bills. We do accrual accounting.
Mm-hmm.
So we do accounts payable and accounts receivable. I can just tell when something's off because I've been doing it for a pretty long time. So I can tell if I'm in the world. But when it comes to actually seeing where we're at, or what the house is coming in at, while I can use the QuickBooks list, there, I guess it's kind of like a chart of costs. There's more things that you as a builder know that went into that house that may not be captured in dollars and cents. So estimating is something of an art that takes thinking. It's not just something that you can robotically say, okay, and here's what our sales price is going to be. There's a little bit of fluency to it,
Yep.
if that makes sense. So
But
an
are you?
Excel spreadsheet
Yep.
is where I take those costs and I put them in, but I might go, well, I know I got a screaming deal on this. For my sales purposes, I'm actually going to put this to build my sales cost. If that makes
Yeah.
sense.
That makes sense on the sale. Are you though on the costs? Are you tracking the costs against what you originally expected to spend against a cost budget?
I would be doing it a lot more, depending on whether there was a bank involved, if customers are involved, things of that nature. But right now, with inflation that's done what it's done, it's kind of like this is what it is. And I'm not kidding. Literally, just today, my dad was talking to me. He's like, so in the past, I talked to the subs, and it was like, given where we're at, in order for us to stay in business, would you basically lower your price? And in the past, they did. So I said to Dad, what about what time period was that? It was in the 90s. I said, Dad, things are different. I said, they're not the same. People aren't the same. Where we're at with inflation, we can't ask our trades to lower their prices because they are spending more money at the grocery store.
Yeah.
So it's almost like an exercise in futility, with the exception of I am instinctively always paying attention to costs, but I'm not going in and spending my time every day on a spreadsheet checking against a budget.
Got it. Okay. Got it. It's kind of interesting because, the end result of that P&L obviously comes from tracking at a project level, but it sounds like you're so close to it, so used to it. And frankly, there's not as much risk for you, right? You don't have a client who's holding you to a certain standard, and you don't have a bank that's asking you for interest expense. So you have full control of the process. Um, it's pretty
Yeah,
interesting.
it's an internal motivation.
Yeah.
It's not for an external somebody's checking on me. But that's how I run my life. Like,
Yeah.
I think there's something about the fiber. My dad, bless his heart, he's out there weeding. Like, he's still a farmer at heart. He is a hard worker. And there is nobody. My mom's not saying, why don't you go weed? Nobody's on his case. It's just who he is as a person. So
Yeah.
I think there is some element of that. Not to say that having an external motivation is invalid, but I'm still checking things. But I guess part of it is a motivation to make sure my family's taken care of. I feel a very, not in a bad way, but a heavy responsibility that Dad built this company, and I do not want to damage it.
Yeah.
So I take that seriously. Anyway.
Cool. Yeah. I mean, this is the recipe for spec success. Hard work, character, limit the debt, keep the cash stocked up, buy intelligently, build intelligently. Yeah. It's impressive what you guys have done.
Appreciate that. We're still trying, and we're still learning, and we're still not false humility. We are screwing things up all the time.
Yeah.
But I read a thing in a custom home magazine years ago. There's 3 types of builders. The first runs around all day long trying to fix mistakes. The second one is really good at fixing mistakes. The third one fixes the mistakes and figures out why they happened in the first place.
Yeah.
And so my brother, we work together, we screw things up. And that's our goal, I think, is just to limit how many times we do the same things wrong.
Yeah.
Totally.
Yeah. Reece, what are you thinking?
I think this was a great episode. I think this was a very aspirational episode in the sense that you're running a very unique, a very tight business, Bryan. And I think there's a lot of good pieces that builders can listen and tune into. And if they are wanting to get more into the spec side, to limit the custom or the client interaction, right? Kind of march more in tune to their own drum as opposed to whatever the market is giving them, right? Insulate themselves a little bit better. I think there was a lot here. I think, and just to close out the episode, what's a little one-liner, Bryan, that you would give to builders that are trying to get to where you are?
Boy, just try to make rational decisions.
Yeah. If it doesn't make sense, don't do it. Make rational decisions.
Yeah, that's something that, because I tend to walk through with prospective buyers, and show them the house, talk to them. And the main comment that buyers make is, well, that makes sense.
Yeah.
As I'm explaining elements of the house. And that's what I would like to see, just my life in general, that it's like, that makes sense.
Yeah.
It's not a bad way to live.
Yeah, no, I think the one-liner was your little thing of the 3 types of builders. That was a good one-liner, right there. There we go. Figure out the mistakes and learn how to not make them again. That's a good one.
Yeah.
That's a good way good applicable to everybody.
Yeah, I love it. And just as a little side note, I was just talking to a spec builder who's building up in Northern California, and they're trying to get rid of a house right now, but the market that they're consuming for, their kitchen wasn't designed in a way that the market that's there is buying for, right? So it's one of those things, you build this big, beautiful spec home, and you can't get rid of it for a very crucial component for the buyers that are in that area. Make rational decisions. You want to walk them through a home that you have built saying, this makes sense.
Yep.
This is something we'll buy.
And we've got basically a split entry. It doesn't look like a split, and we're having a hard time unloading it. And it's the same thing. It happens. But the nice thing about walking through with buyers is I don't need to spend a bunch of money on focus groups. I get to look them in the eye, and I get to hear what they say to each other. And that's kind of my market feedback to see what actually is resonating with people.
Yeah, totally.
Cool. No. All right, Bryan. Well, thanks for coming on. Thanks for the whiskey coffee. We enjoyed talking to you.
It was delicious. It is delicious. I still have a little bit left, but thank you for
I do too. I'm going to finish it after this. Guys, very hospitable. Thanks so much for having me on.
Of course.
All right.
Appreciate it, Bryan.
Until next time.